viable way to break the endless cycle of conflict, violence, and mutual pain and suffering is through a two-state solution in line with the relevant United Nations General Assembly resolutions. Just as the Assembly agreed in 1947 to collectively address this issue, it must now take seriously and uphold its responsibility to support the two sides to peacefully resolve this conflict. This means working much harder to build the consensus needed for peace. It means forging new avenues for direct dialogue between the parties, fostering respect for General Assembly resolutions, and supporting all efforts that build on previous agreements. We must therefore do our utmost to seek all viable outcomes for the sake of the many innocent civilians who have paid and currently are paying the ultimate price of our continued failure to unify. At all costs, we must do our part to avert any regional conflagration. Distinguished delegates, in this context, I welcome the opportunity of the temporary ceasefire that allowed for the release of hostages over the weekend and access to much-needed humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza and all affected areas. I share the deep relief this must bring to the affected and their families. This agreement offered a breakthrough for hope, but it is not nearly enough. I strongly call, yet again, for the humane treatment and immediate unconditional release of all hostages. I reiterate my call for a longer-term humanitarian ceasefire so food, water, and desperately needed medical aid can reach all those in need in the Gaza Strip and all affected areas. Humanitarian aid corridors must remain open and secure, and more assistance simply must be allowed to enter Gaza and all affected areas. I strongly condemn the indiscriminate damage caused to UNRWA schools that are now housing more than 1 million internally displaced persons. It is unthinkable that in the prosecution of this war, contrary to the rules of war, schools are no longer inviolable, nor are they used exclusively for their intended purpose, that is, education. Under international law, the protection of civilians is and must remain paramount. I therefore urge member states to provide sustainable and predictable support to UNRWA as it works to rebuild and valiantly address the biggest humanitarian crisis since its establishment. And I reiterate my solemn tribute to all brave UNRWA staff and other humanitarian workers who gave their lives trying to attenuate massive human suffering in the search for lasting peace. Excellencies, amid this carnage and extraordinary loss and sacrifice, we must find our way back to rebuild trust. Trust that the words of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that all human beings are born free and equal, that all deserve a life free from fear and want, and not written in vain. Trust that the UN Charter and international law, the pillars of our multilateral system and the foundation for our efforts to chart a more peaceful tomorrow, remain intact. Trust that parents and relatives on both sides of this conflict throughout the Middle East will be able to put their children to bed each night in safety. I repeat, in safety. Ralph Bunche, who received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1950 for his work as a UN mediator, had similar aspirations when he expressed his hope for morality in the relations among nations. I reiterate in his words that there be in our time, at long last, a world at peace in which we, the people, may for once begin to make full use of the great good that is in us, unquote. As President of the General Assembly, I remain at your service should any nation or leader desire my assistance in facilitating dialogue towards this end. I thank you. I now give the floor to His Excellency Ahmad Faisal Mohammed of Malaysia in his capacity as Vice Chair of the Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People to introduce the committee's report.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies, allow me first to thank esteemed delegations for their dedication to the question of Palestine and for their support on the 27th October General Assembly vote on humanitarian assistance to Gaza and the resounding General Assembly vote on UNRWA resolutions. The committee also welcomes the adoption of Security Council Resolution 2712/2023 concerning the Gaza Strip and demands all parties to comply with its implementation and their obligations under international law, including international humanitarian law, most notably with regard to the protection of civilians. It is an honor in my capacity as rapporteur of the Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People to present the annual report of the committee contained in document A/78/35. The report covers developments relating to the question of Palestine, as well as the work of the committee between 2nd September 2022 to 31st August 2023. The report is organized in 7 chapters. Chapters 1 and 2 contain the introduction to the report and a brief overview of the major political developments during the reporting period. The reference developments served as the context for the committee's evolving work program and activities during the reporting period. Chapters 3 and 4 outline the mandate entrusted to the committee by the General Assembly and contain information on the organization of the committee's work during the year. Chapter 5 features the work of the committee as well as the activities carried out on its behalf by the Division of Palestinian Rights around 4 major aspects of its mandate. 1, mobilization of the diplomatic community. 2, raising awareness on the question of Palestine. 3, cooperation with intergovernmental organizations, non-governmental organizations, and UN entities. And 4, capacity building. Chapter 6 reports on the activities of the Special Information Program of the Department of Global Communications on the question of Palestine. The last and final Chapter 7 of the report contains recommendations of the committee to this Assembly and other relevant actors, which are based on the international consensus and the Secretary General's known position on the question of Palestine. Specifically, the committee calls on Israel to halt and reverse its ongoing annexation, home demolitions, settlement expansions, and the forced displacement of Palestinians, including women and children. The committee urges Israel to reverse punitive measures against the Palestinian Authority, cease the disproportionate use of lethal force, and protect Palestinian civilians, including from Israeli settlers, in line with its obligations under relevant UN resolutions and international humanitarian law. The committee calls on Israel to respect the status quo at the holy sites in Jerusalem, ensure peaceful religious practices, and lift the ongoing land, air, and sea blockade of Gaza. The committee deems unilateral decisions taken by member states to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel as null and void, and urges member states to officially recognize the state of Palestine in order to promote the two-state solution. The committee will continue to encourage all supporters of the two-state solution to assist with the resumption of meaningful multilateral negotiations towards the achievement of a peaceful settlement on the basis of the long-standing international parameters for a just solution. The committee urges the General Assembly and the Security Council to ensure the implementation of the long-standing parameters for peace in accordance with relevant UN resolutions, and calls on the Secretary General to continue to leverage his good offices in support of a political horizon and the two-state solution. The committee urges regional organizations to take a politically active role to put an end to the Israeli occupation and to achieve a just and lasting resolution to the question of Palestine, such as the one offered by the Arab Peace Initiative. In a similar vein, the committee urges member states to review anti-terror legislation affecting Palestinian civil society organizations. The committee urges member states to support UNRWA with sustainable funding and calls on them to carefully review Israel's use of anti-terror legislation against Palestinian civil society organizations with a view to delegitimize and undermine their activities. The committee conveys its gratitude to the Division for Palestinian Rights of the Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs for its support for the committee's work. It requests the division to continue to provide substantive and secretariat support for all aspects of its mandate. The committee requests the continuation of the Special Information Program on the question of Palestine of the Department of Global Communications, which has made an important contribution to informing the media and the public. Excellencies, tomorrow we will observe the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people in the ECOSOC chamber from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. At 1 p.m., the committee will inaugurate the exhibition entitled Palestine, a Land with a People in the visitors' lobby. We invite all member states to attend tomorrow's events and to submit messages of solidarity from their respective heads of state and governments. This year, in particular, the Solidarity Day observance, mandated by this body and in such tragic times when humanity is tested, presents an opportunity to renew our commitment to protect the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people and salvage the two-state solution. Thank you, Mr. President.
I should like to thank the Vice Chair of the Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People. Next on my list is the Permanent Observer of the State of Palestine.
Mr. President, at the outset, I wish to renew our gratitude to the United Nations Committee on the exercise of the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people under the leadership of Senegal and Ambassador Sheikh Niang, and its bureau members, Cuba, Indonesia, Malaysia, Nicaragua, and Namibia, for remaining at the forefront of the international community's efforts address the plight of the Palestinian people to enable the realization of their inalienable rights, including to self-determination and freedom, and to bring an end to the grave and historic injustice they have borne for over 75 years since the start of the Nakba, an ongoing and searing Nakba that we have painfully witnessed in the dark days of these past weeks and across the decades. We are grateful to Ambassador Ahmad Faisal Mohammed, Vice Chair, for presenting the committee's annual report to the General Assembly, reflecting on the committee's many efforts over the past year and its appeals to the international community as we gather once again in this assembly to address the question of Palestine, to take stock of where we are today and where we are going as the United Nations carries forth in its permanent responsibility towards the question of Palestine until it is justly resolved in all its aspects in accordance with international law and the relevant UN resolutions. Mr. President, the UN Charter starts with this line: we, the peoples of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. I often repeat this line in many of my statements. Not a single Palestinian generation has been saved from the scourge of war. Every single one has witnessed and endured horrors in its flesh. An entire nation, over decades, has faced dispossession, displacement, denial of rights, destruction, and death. Maybe since the 1948 generation, this generation is the one that has suffered most painfully and traumatically. This is the deadliest period ever endured by Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, and they have witnessed many previous assaults. This is the largest forced displacement of Palestinians since the Nakba. This destruction is apocalyptic and the humanitarian crisis catastrophic. There are no laws, no morals, no principles in this world that can justify this abhorrent, inhumane reality. It is one that shakes humans' conscience and demands global action for justice. Mr. President, the massacres against our people in Gaza have mobilized peoples and nations all around the world, speaking out against injustice and calling for justice, calling for a ceasefire now in Gaza. I repeat, calling for a ceasefire now in Gaza, calling for an end to the Israeli occupation and oppression of the Palestinian people, calling for a free Palestine. The General Assembly was the first UN body to reflect this global outrage and to take a clear and unequivocal stance for calling for an immediate, durable, and sustained humanitarian truce leading to a cessation of hostilities. I must add, the Secretary General called for a humanitarian ceasefire now, and the President of the General Assembly few minutes ago in his statement repeated the same idea. The Assembly convened in an emergency special session and took this courageous step over 1 month ago. 2/3 of the UN membership voted in favor of this resolution. Had it been implemented then, thousands of Palestinian lives would have been spared and families would not have endured such agony and anguish. In adopting this resolution, the General Assembly was guided by the imperatives of legality, morality, and humanity, and it proved also to be correct politically. It took the Security Council several more deadly and devastating weeks to finally act on a less ambitious resolution, but driven by several of the same humanitarian considerations addressed by the General Assembly. As the Assembly's resolution had foreseen, only a truce could allow sincere efforts to begin to address the humanitarian catastrophe being inflicted by Israel, the occupying power, in Gaza. Only a truce could lead to the release of people held in captivity and avoid further regional escalation. This truce must turn into a permanent ceasefire. The massacres of Palestinian children, women, and men cannot resume, should not resume. You should not allow it to resume. The human conscience cannot bear it. International law, including humanitarian and human rights law, prohibits it. International law, but also the norms of humanity, demand that we act to stop this war against innocent civilians and save human lives, that we act for humanitarian aid and access throughout the Gaza Strip, the return of those displaced without delay, the end of the siege and blockade, and that we act for accountability. Nothing can ever justify war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. Mr. President, as more and more images of the devastation in Gaza reaches the world, each one of us has a choice to make, either for protection of civilians or their slaughter, either for the rule of international law or indiscriminate vengeance, either for the prospect of peace or perpetual conflict. Virtually every nation represented here has decided, some sooner other than later, to join the right side of history. Now we need to stand united in putting an end to this madness and charting a way forward for a more just, peaceful, stable future. Mr. President, 15,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza, including more than 6,000 children and 4,000 women. More than 30,000 people have been wounded, with many suffering amputations and burns, enduring their injuries and pain without medical care and with nowhere safe to heal and recover. Over 1.8 million civilians in Gaza, or nearly 80% of the population, are estimated to be internally displaced. The majority of them refugees, displaced for the second, third, or fourth times in their lives. Of them, nearly 1.1 million are sheltering in 156 UNRWA facilities across Gaza, bearing indignities that no human should be forced to bear, and still not protected even under the UN flag. Even that is not respected by the occupying power, as it deliberately strikes at homes, schools, hospitals, and UN shelters with barbaric and punitive violence, intent on destroying the basis of human life in Gaza, intent on terrorizing and traumatizing everyone. The sheer magnitude of the killing and maiming, of the destruction and forced displacement, is testimony to how indiscriminate this war is, and goes to show that its primary targets and victims are actually the civilian population in the Gaza Strip. No conflict in recent memory has seen so many children killed at this pace, civilians killed at this pace, journalists killed at this pace, UN staff killed at this pace, humanitarian and medical personnel killed at this pace. This is a full-fledged war against Palestine and its people. This is reconfirmed by what we are witnessing in the West Bank, with over 230 Palestinians killed and thousands have been injured in the span of 7 weeks at the hands of Israeli occupation forces and settlers. Added to the more than 180 Palestinians killed prior to October, in total, among them, 107 children. This is the deadliest period virtually ever witnessed in the West Bank. Over 1,200 Palestinians have been displaced over the same 7 weeks period, added to the more than 1,000 forcibly displaced earlier this year, as Israel carries on non-stop with its illegal settlement, colonization, and annexation of our land. More than 3,000 Palestinian civilians, including children, have been arrested and detained by incessant military raids by the Israeli occupying forces across the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, in the same 7 weeks period, now bringing the number of prisoners to over 10,000 Palestinians held captive in Israeli jails, enduring inhumane conditions. The oppression and persecution, abuse and discrimination against our people continues unabated under this illegal Israeli colonial occupation and apartheid regime. It is the same logic at play everywhere. For the Israeli government, the priority is not security. It is the destruction of the Palestinian nation, of the very presence and existence of the Palestinian people on their land of Palestinian statehood. Even at the expense of security, through dispossession, displacement, denial of rights, and if all that is not enough, then through death, even their right to life is denied. You know how we know all this? Because Israeli leaders cannot get themselves to hide it anymore. They are telling you this every day, in every statement they make. In the words of one of them, Palestinians have three choices, and this one is a minister sitting in the cabinet of Prime Minister Netanyahu. The choices are surrender and subjugation, exodus, or death. Three choices: surrender and subjugation, exodus, or death. And we reject these things because we are proud people and we are determined to live in our national homeland. Mr. President, this catastrophe demonstrated two things: that there is no peace in the Middle East without a just and lasting solution to the question of Palestine, in accordance with international law and the relevant UN resolutions, and that Palestinian freedom, not further oppression and occupation, is the path to peace and security for all. Palestinian rights cannot continue to be subordinated, violated, or erased. They are inalienable, just like for all peoples. The right to self-determination, the right of our refugees to return, the right to life, the right to exist in dignity and peace and stability in our homeland, Palestine. Palestine cannot remain the exception to the rule of law and the enjoyment of human rights. All our efforts must be dedicated now to prevent further massacres and to ending the assault on the lives and existence of the Palestinian nation. But we must, in parallel, be preparing for an unprecedented, bold, and collective effort to end colonization and occupation and apartheid and to achieve peace. The two-state solution requires a strong, independent, and sovereign Palestinian state on the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. Those who favor such a solution must take action against the colonial occupation that prevents and kills such a prospect and must recognize the state of Palestine, provide it with membership at the UN, and help it actualize its sovereignty on the ground. You have to act now. We have to become like you, a full member in the United Nations, to begin the process of the actualization of the two-state solution after we end the occupation. It is your collective responsibility to allow us to accomplish that. We have stated before in this August Assembly, and must reiterate, Palestine is the answer. Justice in Palestine would mean that our international law-based order has triumphed over impunity and double standards. Justice in Palestine would mean that freedom, peaceful settlement, and coexistence have triumphed over oppression and discrimination. Justice in Palestine means we have upheld the principle that we are equals as human beings and as nations. Let us continue to work together to achieve that justice and to achieve the peace and security that the Palestinian and Israeli peoples, that our region and that the world needs. Help us to accomplish that. I thank you, Mr. President, and once again express my thanks to all members of the committee and to the Division for Palestinian Rights and to all states who continue to offer their principled support and solidarity to the Palestinian people in our ongoing journey to justly and peacefully resolve the Palestine question, and I thank you very much.
I should like to thank the observer of the Observer State of Palestine for his statement. Next on my list is Her Excellency Retno Lestari Priyansari Marsudi, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Indonesia. You have the floor, ma'am.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Mr. President, on 26 October, I had stood at this hall to attend the emergency special session where Indonesia co-sponsored the resolution on the Gaza crisis. I have flown back to New York City, back to this rostrum, because I care about justice, because I care about humanity and about Palestine. I cannot stand still to see thousands of deaths of innocent women and children. I cannot stand still to see homes, schools, and hospitals being flattened to rubble. Can you stand still seeing of this horrific situation? On November 11, the Joint Summit of Arab League's OIC issued a strong position on the importance of unhindered humanitarian assistance, permanent ceasefire, and two-state solution. Last week, together with a number of the OIC foreign ministers, I traveled to Beijing, Moscow, London, and Paris. Those countries are permanent members of the Security Councils. I urge them to do more for justice and humanity for Palestine. And I will continue this effort to reach and talk to as many countries as possible. Mr. President, can I ask, is what Israel doing consistent with the international law? Is it consistent with international humanitarian law? Let us be honest to ourselves in answering this question. And if we really want to defend justice and humanity, there are 4 issues we should work for. First, we need a permanent ceasefire. The first extended pause in hostilities is a welcome start to end these atrocities. But these uneasy pauses will not be enough. We need a ceasefire. Without it, it will be difficult to do the rest, to save lives, and for aid agencies to work in Gaza. Second, ensure unhindered humanitarian assistance. Massive humanitarian aid is needed in Gaza. We need to scale up humanitarian assistance. We must support UNRWA and other humanitarian agencies to help 1.7 million Palestinians forcibly displaced in Gaza. Indonesia is committed to scaling up assistance, including by deploying our floating hospital. Third, we must stand for justice. Even wars have rules and limits, and these are nowhere to be seen in Gaza. Attacks against hospitals, schools, places of worship, refugee camps should not be normalized. I repeat, should not be normalized. We must call a spade a spade. What has taken place in Gaza are clear violations of international humanitarian law, and failure to act may equal to complicity. We must also call out double standard in the application of international law, which seriously undermine the sanctity of the law itself. Indonesia therefore supports efforts to ensure accountability of Israel at various relevant forums, including the International Court of Justice. And fourth, restart the Palestine-Israel peace and political process. Mr. President, addressing the question of Palestine requires us to address the root causes, plain and simple. The occupation on the Palestinian land must end. There are no military solution to this conflict. Political solution is the only answer. We need a credible negotiation process that is transparent and equitable, with Palestine and Israel having equal standing as UN full members, leading to a two-state solution based on internationally agreed parameters. Mr. President, Indonesia calls on the global community to stand together with humanity. Only by uniting can we bring peace to Palestine and the region. Only by using our heart can we bring humanity and justice. I thank you very much.
I should like to thank the distinguished representative of Indonesia, and I now offer the floor to the distinguished representative of Oman, speaking on behalf of the Gulf Cooperation Council.